In the early years of the 15th century, the Yongle Emperor of the Ming Dynasty made a decision that would reshape the geography of power in China forever. He would move his imperial capital from Nanjing in the south northward to Beijing, a city closer to the Mongol frontiers where military threats demanded the emperor's personal presence, and a city that he intended to transform into the most magnificent expression of Chinese imperial power that the world had ever witnessed. The scale of what he envisioned was extraordinary, even by the standards of an emperor commanding the resources of the world's most populous nation. Not merely a palace, but a city within a city, an entire imperial world sealed behind walls so massive, so perfectly constructed, so loaded with symbolic meaning that simply approaching them would communicate the absolute nature of the power they protected. The site was chosen according to principles of feng shui, the Chinese understanding of how natural and built environments relate to cosmic forces at a location where the geography was understood to channel favorable energies. The ground was prepared. The planners worked for years before a single major wall rose. The logistics of supplying such a project, the stone, the timber, the ceramic tiles, the skilled craftsmen required the organizational capacity of an empire mobilized toward a single architectural purpose. The decision had been made. Construction had only just begun. The building of the Forbidden City between 1406 and 1420 was one of the largest construction projects in human history, demanding resources, logistics, and human labor on a scale that tests the modern imagination. Contemporary records suggest that approximately 1 million workers participated in the construction over its 14 years. Laborers, craftsmen, engineers, artists, and administrators, drawn from every province of Ming China through the corvée labor system that required subjects to contribute their work to imperial projects. The timber required for the palace's hundreds of buildings came primarily from the forests of Sichuan and Yunnan provinces in southwest China, massive logs transported overland and then floated along rivers for distances of thousands of kilometers. Stone was quarried from sites near Beijing, the largest blocks, some weighing over 200 tons, transported to the construction site during winter months when ice surfaces allowed them to be slid on wooden sledges with far less friction than wheeled vehicles could manage on summer roads. The ceramic tiles that would crown every building in their distinctive deep yellow, yellow being the color reserved by imperial decree for the emperor's exclusive use, were manufactured in specialized kilns in Suzhou, their production quality monitored with the same severity applied to every other aspect of the palace's creation. The palace that emerged from this enormous organized effort was unlike anything that had previously stood in Beijing. An enormous palace was emerging from the earth. The outer walls of the Forbidden City announce its presence to the surrounding city of Beijing with a visual impact that their designers clearly calculated and their builders achieved with remarkable success. Rising approximately 10 meters from the ground, faced with the distinctive deep crimson pigment that Chinese imperial tradition associated with good fortune and protective power, stretching in an almost perfectly rectangular enclosure, approximately 960 meters from north to south and 750 meters from east to west, the outer walls present a facade of extraordinary authority to anyone approaching from any direction. The wall's top surface is broad enough to walk along comfortably, and watchtowers of elaborate multi-storied design rise at each of the four corners, their complex roof structures creating silhouettes that are simultaneously defensive and decorative, communicating military seriousness through architectural beauty. A moat 52 meters wide surrounds the entire complex, its water both a genuine defensive barrier and a visual element of great beauty. Particularly in winter, when the ice surfaces caught the pale Beijing sun, or in summer, when lotus plants spread across the water's surface between the outer walls and the road that rings the complex. 4 gates, one at each cardinal direction, provide the only entry points through these outer walls. The southern gate, the Meridian Gate, or Wumen, is the principal entrance, its U-shaped plan and towering gatehouse, the first architectural statement that visitors would encounter. What lay beyond them had never been seen by ordinary citizens. To pass through the Meridian Gate into the Forbidden City was to enter a different world, and its designers understood exactly how to make that transition feel genuinely transformative. The gatehouse itself is 5 bays wide and 3 stories tall, its golden tiled roofline curving upward at the corners in the distinctive sweep of Imperial Chinese architecture. Its surface covered with decorative elements, whose red and gold combination declares the colors of the imperial tradition. 5 doorways pierce the gate's lower structure, the central doorway reserved exclusively for the emperor himself. The 2 flanking doors, used by senior imperial family members and the highest officials, the outermost doors used by lower officials during major ceremonies. This graduated system of access, encoded into the physical structure of the gate, communicated the hierarchical nature of the imperial world that lay beyond it before a visitor had taken their first step inside. Through the Meridian Gate, a vast open space opens with a sudden expansiveness that feels deliberately designed to overwhelm, because it was. The outer court of the Forbidden City encompasses an enormous paved courtyard through which the Golden Water River flows in a graceful curve, crossed by 5 marble bridges whose forms echo the curve of a hunting bow, each bridge's width and decoration calibrated to the rank of those permitted to use it. The scale of this outer space, empty of buildings, allows visitors to see the outer Golden Water Bridge ahead while simultaneously experiencing the surrounding walls pressing inward.
Incredible formation!
Courtyard was only the beginning. The Hall of Supreme Harmony, Taihadian in Chinese, stands at the peak of a 3-tiered marble terrace at the northern end of the Forbidden City's first great courtyard, and it is the largest wooden structure in China, approximately 64 meters wide, 37 meters deep, and 35 meters tall, its golden tiled roof soaring above the surrounding buildings with a presence that communicates absolute authority. This is the ceremonial center of the entire imperial system, the place where the emperor received the most important formal state ceremonies, where new dynasties were proclaimed, where generals received military commissions before major campaigns, where the names of successful examination candidates were announced. The interior is dominated by the dragon throne, set on a raised platform at the hall's center, surrounded by golden columns carved with coiling dragons, and by the scent of sandalwood from incense burners whose smoke rose continuously during imperial ceremonies. On the ceiling directly above the throne, a carved coiling dragon holds a reflective orb, the Xuanyuan mirror, according to legend capable of detecting impostors who falsely claimed the throne, its presence adding a dimension of cosmic legitimacy to the physical seat of power below. Access to the Hall of Supreme Harmony during imperial ceremonies was strictly regulated by rank and occasion. The vast courtyard in front of the hall could accommodate tens of thousands of officials arranged in precise formations, their positions determined by rank, their behavior governed by protocols of extraordinary specificity. Who was allowed to stand here mattered enormously. On the great ceremonial occasions that filled the Ming imperial calendar, the New Year, the winter solstice, the emperor's birthday, the Forbidden City became a setting for performances of political theater whose scale and precision were designed to make the empire's hierarchical order visible, tangible, and overwhelming to everyone who participated. Thousands of officials, arranged in precise formations in the courtyard before the Hall of Supreme Harmony, performed coordinated ritual prostrations, the kowtow, at prescribed moments during ceremonies that could last for hours. Ceremonial music played from orchestras positioned at specific locations within the courtyard, their instruments, bronze bells, stone chimes, drums, flutes, combining in sounds whose tonal arrangements carried cosmological significance, encoded in classical Chinese musical theory. Elephants, gifts from the rulers of tributary states in Southeast Asia, were sometimes led through the ceremonial spaces as visible demonstrations of the vast reach of Chinese imperial power and the willingness of distant rulers to submit tribute. The emperor himself moved through these ceremonies in a state of almost supernatural dignity, every gesture prescribed, every movement tracked by officials whose job was to ensure that the performance of imperial authority met the precise standards that generations of ritual specialists had developed. The ceremonies were not simply performances for display, however. They served a genuine governmental function, reaffirming the relationships of obligation, hierarchy, and legitimacy that held the imperial system together across a territory of continental scale. Power extended far beyond these halls, reaching across an empire of hundreds of millions. Behind the ceremonial grandeur of the outer court lay the inner court, the private imperial world where the emperor actually lived, worked, and spent the greater part of each day in routines that combined the administrative demands of governing an empire with the domestic patterns of a life conducted within the Forbidden City's walls. The emperor's day began before dawn. A small army of eunuch servants, the exclusively male palace staff, whose physical modification was understood to guarantee their isolation from the imperial family's female members, prepared the emperor's clothing, arranged his meals, and managed the administrative papers that required his attention before the first formal audiences of the day. The emperor consumed his meals in solitary ritual, served by attendants who presented each dish in prescribed sequence. Food tasted for poison before reaching the imperial table, the variety and quality of each meal communicating through its very abundance the emperor's position at the pinnacle of an ordered universe. Administrative work consumed significant portions of each day, reading memorials, formal documents submitted by officials throughout the empire on every conceivable subject, and writing or approving the responses that constituted imperial governance. The emperor was not simply a ceremonial figure, but an active administrator whose decisions governed the lives of hundreds of millions of subjects, his brushstrokes on paper traveling as imperial commands to every corner of China. The inner palace remained largely hidden from all but the most trusted officials. Within the inner court of the Forbidden City, the imperial family lived a life of extraordinary privilege that was simultaneously a life of extraordinary constraint. The empress occupied the palace of earthly tranquility, her position as the emperor's principal consort carrying enormous symbolic weight in a system where the imperial family's continuity was a matter of cosmic significance rather than merely personal concern. The imperial consorts, the secondary wives whose numbers varied considerably across the dynasties that occupied the palace, each occupied their own palace buildings within the inner court, their rank, privileges, and influence determined by complex hierarchies that could shift dramatically depending on whether they produced sons and how their sons fared in the competition for imperial favor. Children born within the palace grew up in an environment of extraordinary richness that was also, paradoxically, quite isolated from ordinary human experience. Imperial princes received intensive education from scholars of the highest caliber, their curriculum covering classical literature, history, philosophy, mathematics, and military strategy. Imperial daughters were educated appropriately for their eventual roles as political marriages connecting the Ming court to important families or neighboring states. The palace compound that housed these families, the palaces of the Eastern and Western Six, comprised dozens of individual buildings organized around their own interior courtyards, each a miniature version of the palace's broader hierarchical spatial logic. Beyond these residential palaces, the gardens revealed another world entirely. At the northern end of the Forbidden City, occupying a rectangular area approximately 140 meters from east to west and 90 meters from north to south, the Imperial Garden. Yuhua Yuan offered the palace's residents a carefully designed retreat from the overwhelming formality and ceremonial weight of the state spaces to its south. Created during the early Ming period and subsequently modified by later emperors, the garden combined ancient cypress trees whose twisted forms had accumulated centuries of symbolic significance with carefully placed rock formations, pavilions of delicate architectural refinement, and paved pathways whose surfaces were arranged in patterns using pebbles of different colors to create pictorial designs visible underfoot. Artificial rockeries mountains in miniature, constructed from porous limestone brought from distant lakes and rivers, provided elevated viewpoints and intimate sheltered spaces within a relatively small area. The garden's designers exploiting the visual complexity of varied levels and unexpected enclosures to create a sense of spatial richness far exceeding the garden's actual dimensions. Specific plants carried specific symbolic meanings within Chinese botanical tradition. Pine trees embodying longevity and resilience, bamboo representing flexible strength, chrysanthemums associated with scholarly retirement from official life. The Well of Pearls in the northeastern corner of the garden was associated with one of the palace's most poignant historical episodes, the drowning of the Pearl concubine during the Boxer Rebellion of 1900. Her story becoming one of the Forbidden City's most remembered human tragedies. The palace never truly slept, even in its most peaceful corners. The Forbidden City functioned because of the labor of thousands of people whose names history has largely not preserved, but whose daily work kept the palace operating with the precision and reliability that imperial governance demanded. The eunuch population of the palace, which at various points in Ming history numbered in the thousands, managed virtually every practical aspect of daily palace life, maintaining the buildings, managing supplies and food, controlling access to the inner palace, transmitting communications between different parts of the vast compound, and serving the imperial family with the intimate, continuous attention that the palace's operational requirements demanded. Their role was paradoxical. Simultaneously the servants of the most powerful people in China and the gatekeepers whose control over access, information, and daily administration gave the most capable of them extraordinary influence. The eunuch Wei Zhongxian, who dominated the court of the Tianqi emperor in the early 17th century, accumulated political power sufficient to effectively run the empire for several years. A demonstration of how dramatically the formal hierarchy of the imperial system could diverge from the actual distribution of influence. Palace guards, soldiers drawn from elite military units, maintained the outer walls, gates, and key defensive positions throughout the palace compound in rotating shifts, their presence the visible symbol of the military power underlying imperial authority. Ancient traditions of service and ceremony continued generation after generation within these walls, their continuity itself a form of legitimacy for the institution they served. The great festivals of the Chinese imperial calendar transformed the Forbidden City from a place of administrative routine into a spectacle of color, sound, and ceremony whose purpose was to align the emperor and the empire with the cosmic cycles that Chinese cosmological thought understood to govern the natural and human worlds. The Spring Festival, the Lunar New Year, was marked by ceremonies throughout the palace compound, the lighting of lanterns that filled even the great ceremonial courtyards with warm, moving light, and the performance of ritual offerings that connected the imperial family's celebrations to the universal renewal that the new year represented. The winter solstice ceremonies, conducted at the Temple of Heaven just south of the Forbidden City, required the emperor to leave his palace before dawn and perform elaborate offerings to heaven, the supreme cosmic power in Chinese cosmological thought, in rituals whose successful performance was understood to ensure the harmony between heaven, earth, and human society that made good government and agricultural abundance possible. The Dragon Boat Festival, the Mid-Autumn Festival, the Emperor's own birthday, each occasion generated its own distinctive ceremonies, performances, banquets, and ritual activities that filled the palace with an energy very different from the quiet administrative days between them. Music filled spaces that ordinarily heard only the measured footsteps of officials and servants. The palace's color, always dramatic, became even more vivid on these days of celebration. The empire was reaching the heights of its Ming dynasty brilliance. The Ming dynasty at its peak in the 15th and early 16th centuries represented a moment of extraordinary Chinese achievement across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The great maritime expeditions led by the Muslim admiral Zheng He between 1405 and 1433 sent enormous fleets, the largest wooden ships ever built, some reportedly reaching 120 meters in length, as far as East Africa, the Persian Gulf, and the Red Sea, demonstrating Chinese maritime capability and projecting imperial prestige across the Indian Ocean world decades before European ships would reach the same waters. Zheng He's voyages, financed through the Forbidden City's imperial administration and commanded in the emperor's name, brought tributary gifts, including the famous giraffe from East Africa that the Chinese court identified as the mythological Qilin, an auspicious omen, to the Forbidden City. Their exotic variety, a demonstration of the vast world acknowledging Chinese imperial supremacy. The porcelain workshops, silk manufactures, and the artistic ateliers that produced the palace's paintings, calligraphy, bronzeware, and lacquerware achieved technical and aesthetic standards that remain benchmarks of Chinese cultural achievement. The Forbidden City accumulated extraordinary collections of art, literature, and historical records that made it simultaneously a governmental center and one of the world's great repositories of cultural heritage. Then new challenges began emerging that the palace's magnificent walls could not entirely keep outside. The political pressures that accumulated within and around the Ming dynasty across the 16th and early 17th centuries followed patterns that Chinese historical tradition recognized as signs of dynastic decline. The gradual weakening of effective government, fiscal crisis, natural disasters, and the military challenges that each dynasty eventually faced from northern frontiers. Within the Forbidden City, court politics grew increasingly complex and occasionally violent as eunuch factions competed with official bureaucrats for imperial favor and effective control of government. Their struggles playing out in memorial documents, the appointments and dismissals, and the occasional dramatic confrontations that punctuated the later Ming period. Outside the palace walls, peasant rebellions spread across multiple provinces as economic hardship, drought, and the administrative failures of a weakening central government combined to create conditions of genuine desperation for millions of the empire's subjects. The rebel leader Li Zicheng captured Beijing in April 1644 after a rapid advance that the Ming military proved unable to stop. The last Ming emperor, Chongzhen, reportedly hanging himself from a tree on the hill behind the Forbidden City rather than face capture. Li Zicheng's forces occupied the palace briefly, looting some of its extraordinary contents before themselves being displaced by a force that would transform the Forbidden City's story entirely. The palace was facing uncertainty of a kind no amount of architectural magnificence could resolve. A new dynasty was about to inherit everything the Ming had built. The Qing dynasty that established itself in Beijing in 1644, Manchu rulers from northeast of the Great Wall who had defeated both the rebel Li Zicheng and the remaining Ming loyalists in a series of military campaigns, inherited the Forbidden City not simply as a physical asset, but as a complex package of Chinese imperial tradition and legitimacy whose adoption was essential to governing the vast empire they had acquired. The Qing emperors proved remarkably sophisticated in their management of this inheritance. Rather than imposing their Manchu cultural traditions wholesale on the palace and its ceremonies, they adopted the Ming ritual framework with relatively minor modifications, presenting themselves as legitimate successors within the Chinese imperial tradition rather than foreign conquerors who had replaced it. They continued using the Hall of Supreme Harmony for the same great state ceremonies. They maintained the ritual calendar and the cosmological framework that gave the ceremonies their meaning. They retained the eunuch system and the palace administrative structure. But they also made the Forbidden City their own in distinctive ways, adding Tibetan Buddhist temples that reflected the Qing emperor's religious tradition and their political relationship with Tibetan and Mongolian Buddhist communities, maintaining private spaces where Manchu language and cultural practices continued alongside Chinese imperial forms. The greatest Qing emperors, Kangxi, Yongzheng, Qianlong, made the Forbidden City the center of an empire that reached its greatest territorial extent during the 18th century. The palace was evolving while preserving its essential character. Across nearly 5 centuries of continuous imperial occupation, from the Yongle Emperor's completion of the palace complex in 1420 to the abdication of the last Qing emperor in 1912, the Forbidden City adapted to changing dynasties, changing political circumstances, and changing cultural needs while maintaining the fundamental spatial logic and architectural character that its Ming designers had established. The Qing emperors who produced the palace's greatest collection of art and objects, particularly the Qianlong emperor, whose reign from 1735 to 1796 accumulated extraordinary quantities of paintings, calligraphy, bronzes, jades, porcelains, and other cultural objects, transformed the Forbidden City into one of the world's most significant repositories of Chinese cultural heritage, alongside its function as a governmental center. The 19th century brought the palace into increasingly difficult encounters with the modern world. The First and Second Opium Wars that demonstrated China's military vulnerability to European powers, the Taiping Rebellion that convulsed the country's interior, the Boxer Rebellion of 1900 that led to foreign troops entering Beijing for the first time, some of them penetrating even into the Forbidden City itself. The Empress Dowager Cixi, who dominated Qing court politics for much of the late 19th and early 20th centuries from within the palace's walls, became one of the most powerful figures in Chinese history, while simultaneously presiding over a dynasty that was visibly losing its hold on effective governance. Modern history was approaching the palace's ancient gates. On February 12, 1912, the abdication of the Xuantong Emperor, the boy emperor known in the West as Puyi, ended more than 2,000 years of continuous imperial rule in China, replacing the Qing dynasty with the Republic of China. Puyi was 6 years old when he ascended the throne in 1908 and 12 when his regents signed the abdication documents that ended it. Under the remarkably generous terms of the Articles of Favorable Treatment negotiated between the new republic and the imperial household, Puyi was permitted to continue living in the inner court of the Forbidden City with his imperial title, his household staff, and a substantial annual subsidy, while the outer court was open to the public as a museum. This peculiar arrangement, a former emperor continuing to inhabit the inner portion of his palace while tourists explored the outer sections, lasted until 1924, when a warlord government expelled Puyi from the palace entirely. He left carrying personal belongings, the last human occupant of an imperial household that had claimed this space continuously for nearly 5 centuries. The palace he left behind was in places deteriorating, roofs leaking, buildings in disrepair, collections partially sold off or removed by the imperial household during its final decades, but it was also still largely intact. The question now was what would happen to one of the world's greatest architectural complexes in a country undergoing revolutionary transformation. Would the palace survive what came next? The preservation of the Forbidden City as a cultural heritage site has been one of the 20th century's most significant acts of historical stewardship, accomplished against considerable odds by the dedicated work of scholars, museum professionals, and ultimately institutional commitment to recognizing the palace's value as an irreplaceable record of Chinese civilization. The Palace Museum, Gugong Boyuan, established in the outer portions of the Forbidden City in 1925, the year after Puyi's expulsion, began the systematic cataloging and conservation work that transformed the palace from a deteriorating former residence into a functioning museum institution. During the Second Sino-Japanese War, much of the palace's most significant portable collection, paintings, bronzes, porcelains, and other objects estimated at nearly 900,000 items, was carefully packed and evacuated southward and eventually westward, a remarkable logistical achievement that preserved the collection from both Japanese occupation.
Behold the symbols of Imperial China's power, the dragon robes, signifying the emperor's mandate, the jade seal, emblem of authority, the ceremonial sword, a mark of protection, panasaurs, treasures of grain, killed to proclaim eternal reign,
is one of the more extraordinary stories of cultural preservation under extreme conditions. The buildings themselves remained in Beijing, surviving the war, surviving the establishment of the People's Republic in 1949, surviving the Cultural Revolution's anti-traditional ideological campaigns, and emerging into the reform era of the 1980s and beyond as increasingly recognized national and international heritage. Its hidden stories remain to be uncovered. The application of modern technology to the Forbidden City's documentation and interpretation has opened dimensions of understanding that previous generations of scholars could not have accessed, regardless of their dedication and intelligence. Laser scanning surveys have created three-dimensional point clouds documenting every surface of the palace complex with millimeter-level accuracy, providing both a permanent archive of the structure's current condition and a foundation for digital reconstruction of spaces as they appeared during different historical periods. Multispectral imaging of the palace's painted decorative surfaces, the elaborate polychrome decorations of columns, beams, and ceiling panels, whose current state reflects centuries of weathering and multiple campaigns of restoration, has revealed original pigment layers and design elements concealed beneath later overpainting, allowing scholars to reconstruct the appearance of decorative schemes as they looked during the Ming and early Qing periods. Archival research in the palace's own extraordinary documentary collections, the Qing Imperial Archives, contain millions of documents recording everything from building repair accounts to ceremonial protocols, has provided historically specific evidence about how spaces were used, furnished, and experienced at particular moments in the palace's history. Digital reconstruction projects have used this combined evidence to produce virtual environments, allowing visitors to experience the palace as it appeared during its greatest imperial periods. The empty stone floors and faded colors of the current museum, replaced with appropriate furnishings, vivid decorative surfaces, and the human activity that the palace was always designed to accommodate. One final journey through that reconstructed world remained. Enter the Forbidden City through the Meridian Gate on a morning in 1750, during the reign of the Qianlong Emperor, when the palace is operating at the height of its Qing dynasty brilliance. The gate tower, above the entrance, is freshly painted, its crimson surfaces vivid in the early morning light, its golden decorations catching the sun with a brilliance that makes the entire structure seem to glow against the blue Beijing sky. Through the gate, the vast outer courtyard opens before you, its stone paving still wet from the morning's cleaning, the golden water river curving across it in its graceful arc, its 5 marble bridges casting their reflections in the clear water below. Officials in distinctive robes of different colors and patterns, each element of their dress communicating their precise rank within the civil service hierarchy, are moving purposefully through the space toward the ministry buildings to the east and west. Palace guards stand at prescribed stations, their stillness itself a form of ceremonial performance. The Hall of Supreme Harmony ahead rises above its 3-tiered marble terrace, its golden roof tiles gleaming, the dragons at its roof ridges surveying the courtyard below with their permanent stone authority. Incense smoke rises from bronze censers before the hall's entrance, its fragrance reaching you across the stone expanse. Turn eastward and follow the pathway through a garden gate into one of the lateral palace compounds, where morning light is just reaching the top of a curved roof, and a scholar official is already at his desk in a study pavilion, brush in hand, reading documents from the previous day's administrative correspondence. The Forbidden City is fully alive. One final gate remained unopened. Empires rise and inevitably change. The Ming dynasty that built the Forbidden City in 14 years of extraordinary collective effort endured for over 2 centuries before giving way to the Qing. The Qing dynasty that inherited and in many respects completed the palace's cultural collections endured for nearly 3 centuries before the modern world's transformations brought it down. The imperial system that both dynasties represented, 2,000 years of continuous governance, organized around the idea of a son of heaven whose authority connected human society to cosmic order, ended in 1912 in a document signed by a 12-year-old boy. Thrones fall silent. But the palace where all of this happened, where emperors ate their solitary meals and annotated their administrative documents, where hundreds of thousands of officials prostrated themselves in precisely choreographed ceremony, where the pearl concubine was lowered into a well, and Li Zicheng's rebels briefly camped in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, where Qianlong spent his remarkable reign accumulating art and power in equal measure, still stands. More than 900 buildings on 72 hectares, their crimson walls faded but unbroken, their golden roofs catching the Beijing light, in the same way they caught it in 1420, when the Yongle Emperor first walked through the completed Meridian Gate into his extraordinary creation. 14 million people visit every year, walking the same stones that emperors walked, standing in the same courtyards where the Chinese world once arranged itself in order of perfect hierarchy. Behind these crimson walls, the story of Imperial China still echoes through every courtyard, every carved dragon, and every golden roof. The Forbidden City was never simply a palace. It was the heart of an empire.